At the time of the writing of this script, I have put in around 40 hours into playing Street Fighter VI, and my feelings on the game are very mixed. On one hand, the game does a lot right, but on the other hand, it does a lot wrong, and because of that, this review has been very difficult to write, because I want to love this game. I think that it's really fun at times, but as a reviewer, I can't ignore the blatant issues that it has either. So I'm going to break this video up into sections. Things that I think the game does right, things that I think the game does wrong, and things that could go either way but are going to be up to taste. And I'll let you decide if you think it's worth your time or not. So for the positives, the roster of playable characters for the base game is 18, which is a very good size, and every single character on that roster feels unique and fun to play. And they're all quite balanced with one another, which can often be very difficult to get right in fighting games, especially when you have a lot of characters. As of right now, I believe every character in Street Fighter VI is viable at a high level, though some are definitely scrub killers. The online uses rollback netcode, which works very well as you'd expect, and is a huge step in the right direction for the fighting game genre. Given that this is Capcom, a Japanese company, this is especially true, as Japan has been very resistant to new technology and software like rollback for a while now, and it's good to see that they're finally embracing it in the modern era of the genre. Along with this, the game provides a lot of resources to help players practice, learn, and even invent techniques with their chosen character. To start, the game provides a tutorial section, which gives an explanation on many of the different aspects of fighting games, as well as the unique aspects of Street Fighter VI. Sadly though, you only get to play as Luke during these tutorials. Of course, playing a different character for these wouldn't change a thing about the information they provide, but being able to do them with the player's given main I think would have benefited the tutorial experience, as it would have made it a bit more personal to the player, which I believe would have given them that little bit of extra help in keeping the players engaged, but regardless of this little nitpick, these tutorials are well done and are a net positive. Another positive is the character guides. After completing the tutorials, the game also provides a list of character guides for each and every fighter, explaining their unique aspects and a bit about the intended strategies for them. After players go through those, they can then learn about how to do various combos with the combo trials. Every fighter has their own list of combo trials to complete from beginner up to advanced. These can be replayed as many times as you like to practice all the various combos for your main, and the game provides additional resources for you to use during these trials to help you master your execution, including the action timing display and input history list. Unfortunately though, these are not on by default, and the game makes no effort to tell you about the option to have them on, which I think is a very big missed opportunity. Especially given that the people who will benefit the most from these are new players who aren't going to know to look for these options. Still, the fact that these are in here at all is a big plus for everyone. And finally, we have training mode, and it's as perfect as a training mode could be. There is a lot to talk about with how many options are here, so much so that it would take all day to explain everything. So instead, let's just go over some of the most notable. The training mode not only provides you with a dummy to practice your combo executions on, but it gives you a number of options to change the behavior of the dummy itself, such as blocking and jumping, and even provides a list of preset training options for ease of use so you can get right into practicing a certain technique. By default, the input history is on, so you can see why you're dropping combos or failing your executions. And right along with that, it provides you with the option to turn on a frame counter, which tells you just about everything you could possibly want to know. Not only does it tell you how many frames are in your technique from startup to finish, not only does it tell you what moves are plus on block and have advantage with exact numbers, the frame meter also tells you exactly how many startup frames a move has, how long the hitbox is active for, and the exact number of recovery frames, all of which are easy to read in color-coded blocks. And of course, we also have the action timing display here as well as the cancel timing display. Put simply, this training mode is perfect. I can't think of a single negative thing about it. The game also has a few game modes besides your basic fighting game versus mode, such as arcade, team battle, and extreme battles. The best of these is definitely the extreme battles, which has a bunch of different combinations for fun and unique experiences. And finally, to end off our positive list, we have Cammy's Ass and Zangief. Just everything about him. I mean, look at this absolute unit. But as I said in the beginning, it's not all good news. So what went wrong? Well, on the more nitpicky side to begin, the menu is just bad. Plain and simple, this menu is bad. It doesn't even look like a menu at all, and it confused me the first time I saw it. If you pay close attention in the very tiny text at the bottom, it's supposed to be an explanation of each of these 3 blocks. But good luck reading that if you're playing on a TV or have poor eyesight. I will say that it's definitely something that you get used to pretty quickly, but I can't help but think how terrible this menu is every time I open the game, so I had to mention it. On a more serious note though, the World Tour mode, which is supposed to be the game's story mode, is borderline unplayable at times. To its credit, I have not crashed at any point so far while playing World Tour myself. However, there is a frequent frame drop problem which will bring the game to an absolute crawl throughout many parts of the experience. It is extremely noticeable and feels awful to play every time it happens, and it happens a lot. Some people are claiming that this is due to Denuvo, which the game has, and others are claiming that it isn't. I don't know what the truth of that is, however, what I do know for a fact is that Capcom only announced that Street Fighter VI would have Denuvo the day before it launched, after everyone had already pre-ordered it. Regardless of whether or not Denuvo is affecting the game in any way, that was a scummy move. And in that same vein, they also waited to announce that their already $60 game would have paid battle passes in it. Not something that necessarily will affect the game itself, but certainly something you should be aware of. What makes this problem all the worse, however, is the fact that World Tour mode really just isn't worth playing to begin with. Even if it ran perfectly smooth, the experience is lackluster, and the story is almost non-existent. As you play, you'll constantly be harassed by countless numbers of brain-dead CPU enemies that won't let you take 2 steps without forcing you into yet another fight sequence, made needlessly long by a combination of either their insane amounts of health or ridiculous numbers. And the fact that much of the game will have you playing at half speed, if not worse, because of the frame drop problem. I would almost be willing to forgive all of that, though, if the story was engaging, but I find myself asking, what story? I am over 12 chapters into the game, and not a single interesting thing has happened. As I write this, I'm struggling to even remember anything notable that happened. I will grant that I have not completed the main story as of yet. However, even if the rest of it ends up being golden, the fact that it would take hours of playtime before getting to anything interesting or engaging in the story is a serious problem, especially since, gameplay-wise, World Tour is really lame. Trust me, you will have way more fun playing extreme battles, arcade mode, or even just doing one-on-one mode with the CPU. It's possible that eventually the frame drop issue will be fixed, however, I cannot judge a game on what it might be sometime in the future. I have to judge it on how the game is right now. And on that same note, there is currently a server issue that's been plaguing the game since release. At seemingly random, you will be disconnected from the game servers with a pop-up that says communication error. This is very annoying to deal with, and I personally have been disconnected multiple times a day from the servers every day. In all fairness, Capcom is very likely going to fix this particular issue eventually. But again, I can't judge a game on what it might be in the future. So you might want to consider waiting for that patch if this is something that concerns you. Though, even with the current server issues, you still will be able to get into most games. It's just that every now and again you'll randomly get disconnected, sometimes right in the middle of a match. Another big problem with the game currently is the CPU. To put it mildly, it's way overtuned. It's hyper-aggressive, input reads everything you do, does one-frame reactions with moves that can't be input in one frame, such as super moves, will constantly go for grapples, and will somehow grapple you out of combos and mix-ups, making it very difficult to practice with. This CPU does things that are simply inhuman, and the highest level of it has managed to perfect KO every top player at least once. The purpose of a good CPU is to help you practice your hit confirms and combos, but this thing is terrible at that because of how inhumanly perfect it is. That's not to say that you can't beat it, but being able to win against it isn't the problem with it. Some of the things this CPU does are just physically impossible for a human player to ever do, so it fails at preparing you for playing in real matches, in my humble opinion. What's worse is that the lower levels of the CPU are basically brain dead and fail in a completely different way at the same purpose. Now, of course, that doesn't mean there isn't any value at all in practicing against the CPU. There still is, obviously. I just wish it was better than what we got. Especially because I believe this CPU is going to give a lot of new players the wrong impression of what this game is really like, as they're not going to have the same knowledge and experience to understand how broken it really is, and what a poor representation of a real match that this CPU is giving them. Speaking of the wrong impression, we have to talk about the modern controls. And first, I would just like to say that I don't have a problem with fighting games using different control schemes. None whatsoever. The problem is having two different control schemes for the same game. All that has done is create a needless divide in the player base, and sadly has created a noob trap for all the new players coming into the game. Modern controls just aren't viable at a high level, and that seems to have been the intention by Capcom. Using modern controls makes you do less damage and limits your moveset, with the only benefit being easier executions. But at a high level, executions aren't an issue, and having less options puts you at a severe disadvantage. This also causes a serious problem with casual and low-level balancing, wherein it functions as a scrub killer against anyone not using it. The easier executions give it a distinct advantage against players who are still learning, and can be extremely frustrating for them. What's worse is that playing against modern players won't prepare you for matches at a higher level, because those players take advantages of gimmicks that are impossible for classic controls to perform at any level. Namely, one-frame supers. This may very well do more harm to the community's growth, as most modern players have no real desire to get better at the game themselves, but are simultaneously taking advantage of gimmicks that newer players that do want to improve don't know how to get around because it's just not possible to do with Classic, which will very likely discourage a lot of new players from continuing to try to improve. If the game had committed to using only one control scheme, then this wouldn't be an issue, obviously. But having one that is just objectively better, and one that's supposed to be a sort of training wheels, just isn't a good idea. Especially because there isn't really any way that would allow players to make the transition from one control scheme to the other, and its only real advantage is gatekeeping new players. And on that same note, the biggest problem that I see with Street Fighter VI is that it really isn't new player friendly, even though it pretends to be. And yes, I understand that I praise the game for having a lot of in-game resources, but there are still a number of things that are never explained, needlessly vague, or just not elaborated enough upon. A great example of this is Drive Rush. The game tells you how to perform a Drive Rush, but what it doesn't ever tell you is that there are two ways to perform a Drive Rush, and that the method that it gives you is virtually useless in comparison to the second method. And it's not that Capcom was unaware of the second method, because that's the same method the CPU will often perform itself. Or how about the fact that some of Juri's combos can only be performed when she has the right number of stocks available? Sure, in her combo trials it tells you to perform her kick to give yourself stocks before doing the rest of the combo. But it never explains why exactly this is important to do. It just expects you to know the reason. There is kind of an explanation of this in the character guide, so I can't say they never tell you about this, but the guide is not very specific and kind of vague, and might even lead you to believe that you always need full stocks to perform these combos. And it's possible that you might miss this bit of information altogether, as the guide seems more focused on explaining how stocks make your moves stronger, and much less about how they let you combo into each other. Speaking of combo trials, the game never explains or makes any mention to the player at all that you do not have to input the motion controls for every part of a combo. For instance, this combo of juries only requires you to input quarter circle forward once to pull it off, but it says in the instructions to input it 3 times, even though that's wrong, meaning that you might spend hours trying to perform this combo only to repeatedly fail time and time again, all the while thinking you're terrible at the game. When the reality is, the game gave you bad directions and didn't explain a critical part of how the game is actually played. And while the game does provide good options in the menu to help you in training mode and during your combo trials, the game makes no effort to tell you that those options are even there, or that you might want to consider using them. And sure, I will grant you that this kind of information has been put out there by the FGC, by people like Maximilian Dood, Ruffelmonger, Justin Wong, etc. But the community stepping up and putting out explanations and guides to explain core and fundamental parts of the game is not an excuse for that information being nowhere to be found in the game itself. And I want you to ask yourself, who needs this information the most? The sort of people who are plugged into the FGC, know all about these creators, and know how to navigate these guides and information, are not the kind of players that are going to struggle. Those are not the new players that this game is trying to cater to and bring in to grow the fighting game community. And slapping a simplified control scheme onto the game does not solve for this blatant lack of critical information for fundamental parts of the game. And lastly, the biggest problem for new players is the speed and timing of this game. Something that has been misunderstood by both devs and the players alike is the idea that the hardest part for new players is to learn input executions. Hence why Street Fighter VI added a simplified control scheme. However, this simply isn't true. The hardest thing for new players to learn is the timing. Performing combos in any fighting game is a lot like learning to play the drums. There is a certain rhythm to it, and the faster or more precise that timing, the harder it is to learn to do. A beginner drummer isn't going to be able to keep up with something like Whiplash, for instance. And in that regard, Street Fighter VI is very unforgiving to new players, namely in its speed. Combos rely heavily on cancels, and the window for executing a cancel is very small. And the more complicated the move you wish to cancel into, the harder it is to both execute fully and on time. Dash canceling, for instance, is incredibly difficult to perform on stick because of how fast and precise the required input is. At first, I couldn't do it at all, and I have already had to spend several hours practicing this singular move to be able to execute it more consistently with a stick. Of course, the game doesn't need to be new player friendly. That by itself isn't a negative, but my issue here is that it pretends like it is when it just isn't. That all said, I want to pull things back a little bit and talk about some of the things that I think aren't necessarily positive or negative per se, but will depend on your tastes. For starters, grappling is really strong in this game, which is great for all you Zangief mains out there. This is the best he's ever been, but the strength of grappling in this game can get pretty annoying. So if you're someone who hates fighting grapplers, then you might not like this game. Drive impact is also really strong and can be kinda dumb. It seems to be intended as a comeback mechanic, and since everyone has it, it is balanced in that regard. But that doesn't mean it's a good addition. Like I said, it will depend on your tastes, but drive impact is really only punishable by another drive impact most of the time. You can also grapple someone out of it or dodge it and punish it that way, but your options overall for dealing with it are very limited and can be annoying to have your mix-ups broken and get a comeback just by somebody mashing 2 buttons. Of course, you can use it very smartly as a combo extender, a punish counter, and as an escape method from the corner and the like. but most people don't use it like that, and it's not something that everyone is going to enjoy playing with or against. And we have already sadly seen its addition in the game causing players to be far more defensive and afraid to commit to combos for fear of getting hit by Drive Impact, which makes those matches much less fun to watch or to play in. Something else to keep in mind is that there are two different places for casual matchmaking: Fighting Grounds and the Battle Hub. Granted, each one is a little different from the other, but it's strange to say the least that we have two separate places for essentially the same thing. I don't like that, but it's not bad per se, so I wanted to include it here at the end. And speaking of the Battle Hub, you can't choose what kind of extreme battle you'd like to play. It's set at random each day in the Battle Hub, and you just get the luck of the draw for that day. And I guess that's about everything, so let's wrap it up. I know that it may sound a bit like I hate this game, but I promise you that I really don't. I absolutely love playing Street Fighter VI, and I really like it as a game. I just can't bring myself to say that I love the game in its current state, even though I really want to. Because at the end of the day, for as much as this game did right, it still does a lot wrong. And I think it's important that I am upfront and honest about all of that, so you can make an informed purchase. I don't want to influence you with my own personal bias into making that purchase, so I did my best to keep that out of my review. If the issues with the game I mentioned do not bother you whatsoever, and are not a concern for you, then I think that's wonderful, and you should buy Street Fighter VI. I am certain that you will have just as much fun with it as I have, if not even more so. However, if the problems I brought up make you decide not to play, then I completely understand that too, and I respect your decision. $60 is a lot of money. However, I would still like to encourage you to at least try the free demo. It's completely free, and it might change your mind. But that's really all there is to it, so, as always, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoy the content, please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.